Good afternoon, and welcome to the TIP report rollout for 2020. My name is John Richmond, and I have the honor of serving the team at the Trafficking in Persons Office at the Department of State. I'm pleased to join Secretary Mike Pompeo and Advisor Ivanka Trump in releasing the 20th annual Trafficking in Persons report in the historic treaty room here at the Department of State. Today's release marks a historic milestone in the fight to end trafficking around the world. The United States is committed to ending modern slavery, and one of the strongest indications of our commitment is the report that we are launching today, the 20th in a row. For 20 years, we have been at this work together. We remain steadfast in declaring that there is no excuse for human trafficking and that governments must take bold action in order to bring the reforms that are necessary. Today, we celebrate progress and lean forward with hope into the work that remains. To all of you who are joining us virtually, it matters greatly that you have chosen to turn your attention to the release of this report. Whether you're a seasoned leader in the movement or just beginning your advocacy, we are grateful to have you here today. A brief word about today's program. We'll begin with remarks from Secretary Pompeo and then Advisor Trump. Following these remarks, we'll honor our 10 courageous trafficking in persons heroes, individuals who dedicated their lives to combating human trafficking. After the presentation of awards, we'll hear brief remarks from one of this year's TIP report heroes, Ms. Sophie Otiende. Then I'll offer a word of closing, and you all will be able to download the 20th anniversary report to share with others. Now, ladies and gentlemen, Secretary of State Michael Pompeo.
Thank you, Ambassador Richmond. Thank you for the kind introduction. Welcome, Ivanka. First and foremost, to all the victims and survivors watching, you're why this work is done. It's why we are humbled to witness your courage and resilience. I want to thank Ambassador Richmond and his team for the outstanding work on this now 2 decades of trafficking in persons reports. Even in spite of the challenges posed by the pandemic, it's been excellent work. I want to thank Advisor to the President Ivanka Trump for being here as well. She has been a major catalyst for putting the fight against human trafficking front and center in the Trump administration's foreign policy and our domestic agenda. I'm also pleased to welcome members of Congress. Congressman Smith is here, ambassadors, representatives from around the globe who have tuned in to show your support for what it is we're doing here. It's a privilege this afternoon to honor those leading the fight against human trafficking in our 2020 TIP report heroes. I want to start off with the story of a young American boy who I'll call Ted. When Ted was 10, his mother began dating a new man who seemed perfect. After a few months, however, it became clear he was using Ted's mother to get closer to Ted. He threatened Ted's mom, drugged and abused Ted, and forced him to have sex with others for his own profit. Ted only reported this abuse after a failed suicide attempt several years later. I share this sad tale to emphasize that human trafficking, and that includes forced labor and sex trafficking, happens all around us, even here in America. There are 25 million adults and children suffering from labor and sex trafficking worldwide. That desecration of the inherent value and immeasurable worth of human beings, each of us created in the image of God, makes human trafficking a truly wicked act. The United States, throughout our history, has stood in defense of human rights like no other nation. As our Commission on Unalienable Rights will elaborate on its upcoming report, America was founded on a promise to uphold unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Trump administration's work to end human trafficking is an important part of that noble tradition. Last year, President Trump restricted certain types of assistance to the governments of 15 countries that were ranked at Tier 3, the lowest possible designation in the 2019 TIP report. In January of this year, the President hosted a White House summit on human trafficking. He signed an executive order to combat human trafficking online child exploitation here in the United States. This administration has ensured that nearly $500 million is dedicated to the global fight against both sex and labor trafficking. Today we continue this good work. I'd like to share just a few highlights from this report, starting with some really good news. 22 countries received upgrade this year, 13 of them from sub-Saharan Africa. Namibia received a Tier 1 rating, the best possible. It is the first and only African country to do so since 2012. Congratulations on that good work. I also want to recognize Singapore, the report's other newly ranked Tier 1 country, and Bolivia for their progress to increase convictions and identify victims, among other significant improvements. Unfortunately, the report also calls out a group of nations whose state-sponsored pattern of forced labor have designated them in the Tier 3 category. Among them are China, where the Chinese Communist Party and its state-owned enterprises often force citizens to work in horrendous conditions on Belt and Road project. Then there's Cuba. Up to 50,000 Cuban doctors have been forced by the Castro regime into human trafficking situations in more than 60 countries around the globe. They are the regime's #1 source of income. And in Central Asia, sub-governments have a long-standing history of compelling people to work in the cotton industry and other sectors. Uzbekistan's significant efforts to address this are setting a new standard for others in the region. We take government-sponsored trafficking very seriously. It's a perversion of any government's reason for existence, to protect rights, not crush them. The United States will not stand by as any government with a policy or pattern of human trafficking subjects its own citizens to this kind of oppression. We will work tirelessly in the United States to free those who are still enslaved. We will help restore the lives of those who have been freed, and we will punish their tormentors. And now it's my honor to have joining us for the 4th year in a row to honor some of those doing this heroic work is a truly passionate advocate for the vulnerable, advisor to the President, Ms. Ivanka Trump. Ivanka, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Your leadership at the State Department has significantly advanced the fight against human trafficking in all of its grotesque and evil forms. We thank you for your great work. And we are also incredibly grateful to Ambassador Richmond for being here with us today. Your commitment is unwavering, and we feel fortunate to have you serving in the role in which you are. The U.S. government is efforts across the board to stop this heinous crime is done in partnership, of course, with Congress. And it's great today to have Representative Chris Smith join us, one of the earliest advocates in Congress to really combat this horrendous evil. So thank you for being here today. This year marks a milestone in our fight against trafficking in persons. 20 years ago, the landmark Trafficking Victim Protection Act was signed into law, establishing the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons within the U.S. Department of State. This past January, the White House convened a historic summit, as Secretary Pompeo mentioned, on human trafficking, honoring this 20th anniversary. During the summit, we heard from incredible survivors, including Jessica Hamlet, who I met just this past spring in Atlanta, Georgia, at Wellspring Living. Jessica shared her horrendous experience of being trafficked for sex domestically, beginning at the age of 12, after suffering a childhood of abuse, ultimately losing custody of her own children, and facing serious challenges with drug abuse and addiction. Despite all this, Jessica has recently completed an apprenticeship at Delta Airlines, regained custody of her beautiful daughter, which the President and I were so fortunate to meet at the summit, and